All right, testing. Let me know in the chat if you can see this. This is Aron. Just gonna, make sure everything is working. I've had some trouble in the past. All right, it seems like chat is up. Right. Shouldn't have any delay today. Testing what? All right, seems to be working. Hey, Jonathan. Hey, Ethan. Good to see y'all. All right, we have Colleen. Wow, folks are in the house. Really excited to bring this 15th live stream. I didn't think starting we'd have 15, but yeah, really excited to jump into automations. I'm just gonna make sure everything seems to be working. Everything seems to be okay here. Yeah, really excited to kick this off. Hello, Mac Support Store. Good to see you. Welcome. And yeah, let's jump in. This should be a fun one. So let's just do the intro, and yeah, let's jump in. All right, welcome. So actually, I think I need to do one more thing here. I need to refresh the chat so everyone could see the chat. Okay. All right. Hey, Brad, welcome. All right, so welcome to live stream number 15. This should be our first time being multi-platform. Hey, Tom, good timing there. Really excited to bring you this live stream talking about Airtable Automations. So yeah, Airtable Automations is the heart, the secret I've had most trouble keeping from everyone, and really excited to bring you this kind of beta and really showing you what's possible today with Airtable Automations. So, our playbook, our kind of outline for today, just going to talk a little bit about the use case. Then we're going to jump into a broad overview of automation. Then just talking a little bit about, what are those big unlocks that we can use Airtable Automations for today. And then, some geeky stuff at the end around maybe some things that aren't obvious that you can do with Airtable Automations. And really that's where I think we'll have a lot of fun for folks who maybe are a little more proficient in Airtable, but we do want to make sure that everyone gets value out of today's live stream. Hey, Connor, good to see you. Hopefully you'll get some value out of today's session as well. Okay, so yeah, without further ado, let me just talk about the use case here. So I really think Airtable is underused from a recruitment standpoint. So I did want to bring a very simple recruitment pipeline. Now, it's totally fine if you're not a recruiter, or workflow today should be good no matter what your use case is. I'm just going to I see that the chat is covering this, so just going to bring that up if you want to look at the agenda for today. And so very simply, we have a pipeline where folks go from new to interview to reviewing to hired and to rejected, very simply. And each one of those steps, we have different tasks that need to happen. So I'm actually going to close this out, come back to it in a moment. These types of recurring tasks. So they're not mundane. They're just the same no matter what who the candidate is. So we have first reviewing the package. So you need to do that for every person that comes into our new status. And then once you've reviewed the package, you need to then send the invite for the interview, assign an interviewer. Once they've gone to that interview, there's additional steps. Get that yes, no from interviewer. So I'm just going quickly here because I made this up, but really think of those. What are those tasks that need to happen for each one of your steps. And frankly, it doesn't really matter if it's tasks or not. Just think of it as linked records if you're more on the proficient type. Then when you're hired, you need to prep for onboarding. And at any moment, if you're rejected, we need to send you that rejection letter. So really kind of broad use case. Think of this not as a recruiting pipeline, but whatever, kind of funneling through whatever your status is as jobs move through your pipeline. So, what are those things that we could automate? What head honcho is a job. It's a very serious job, Ethan. You gotta hire for a good head honcho. And so, automations will kind of will automate a lot of the kind of manual steps. And there are kind of two broad automations that I do want to kind of bring to your attention around notifications and managing recurring tasks, right? So those are the two big kind of unlocks that we are going to talk about. So we did the base overview. Let me know in the chat if you have any questions around the base overview. So very simple recruiting, candidates, and then we have tasks associated to each one of those candidates that's grouped by candidate. Now, this is like a bad base. So let me know if you can tell why this base structure isn't that great. But for today's, it's totally fine. And I'll say at the end why this is actually bad base structure. Okay, so we've done the base overview. Let's actually talk about what is automation. So I'm going to jump into this little. Actually, let me reduce the size of this. I shouldn't do this live, but this should help give us a little more real estate there. Okay, so the chat should now be to the right of me, and that'll give us a little more space here. I'll make this larger. Let me know if anything is missed. I should have thought of that before. Okay, so essentially automations is trigger and actions. So something happens in your base that is specific to your workflow. Maybe someone is at the interview stage. Maybe someone entered your pipeline and you want something else to happen, right? So very simply, let's create an automation. Let's just talk about this. So our first is going to be notifying the submitter. So this is just letting that person that is entering our pipeline know that we've received their submission, right? So we have all of that information. If I go back to my base, if I go back to my candidates here, I have their name and I have their email, and then I have a bunch of information, right? What job they applied for. So it'd be great to let them know, like, hey, we've received your application. I feel like that's a level of decency that as a recruiter you should have, or in your recruitment process. So essentially we need to choose a trigger. So triggers are when that workflow is going to start. So choose a trigger, and we are going to select when a record enters a view, right? So before we do that, let's actually kind of talk about how folks submit. So let's actually create a form view of our job submission. So job submission form, apply to automate all the things. Now, of course, my own process is going to be on Airtable. So what is your name? Status, let's move that out here. Notes, let's move that out. That's for us. CV is good. What job are you applying for? And then they can select submitter. Let's actually just email, right? And little tip here. So, let's say I have a status and I want to force folks to put it in new, right? So this is actually part of my workflow, but I want folks to always submit new. That way we can go through the form, but we can also have folks submit internally, and just as long as we put them in new, they'll have that same bucket. So I want one process, whether you're form submission or coming into my base generically. And so let's limit the selection to specific options and force it to new and require it. And I'll show you what that is. Yes, Ethan, I'll show you in a minute how this looks on the front end for a candidate. So CV, what job are you applying for? Your email, Tasks is something we do internally. Interviewer, we manage internally. Interview date. So now let's open the form. Let's actually set a few more things as required here. So let's say name, that sounds like something you should require. CV, also required. What job are you applying for? Required. Email, all required. Right? Now, note you can probably style this a little better. So let's say I am just Aron G. And then as you see, I'm forcing it as required, and then I'm forcing it as new. And this will kind of work well for my process, right? So I'm forcing it as status. Let me see if I have kind of something I could put as a CV. I'm not very good at many things, so my CV is just blank. There we go. I'm only good at Airtable. It's just a big Airtable. That's what's in that CV. What job are you applying for? Head honcho. Email. Okay. I submit that. If I come back here and I go into my all candidates, I now have that candidate who's applied as head honcho. So now let's create a view that is specific to new candidates. So I actually already did this. I'll just walk through it again. So I have a new submission, right? So this is just saying, only show me candidates where status is new. And now every time someone submits that form, we are going to add it to our new submission. Okay, and that's going to be the view that triggers our workflow, right? So when we choose a trigger, when a record enters a view, let's submit, take our table, and let's go into new submission, right? So I'm just making sure that you guys can see. Should I move myself? Can I move myself out of the way like that? Is this better? Can you guys now still see the right? This feels better, right? Okay. Okay, so now we're saying start this automation when a new candidate enters our new submission view. Let's run the test. This is going to bring up that first record. Let's see what that record is. So it's pulled up Mila May. So this record right here. And what we see is that this record has the same information as this record. So it's saying, okay, now I have that data. I have the access to that information, right? So I have the record ID, I have the name, I have the submitter, and that information becomes available in future steps. Now, if you're familiar with Zapier, this is nothing new to you. This will be very similar, right? And let's then add an action. So a few things actually happen at this point, right? We need to send an email to that person to say, hey, we've received your submission, but there are other steps we could do as well. And I'll get to that in a moment. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm pretty excited here. Let's send. So add an action. There are a few actions here, mainly around notifications today. So let's send an email. And then you can kind of specify this however you want. So you can actually pull information from that previous step. So when a record enters a view, that's step one. Let's go and get that person's email. And that is in submitter. Really bad at naming. That should be email. It should be called email. I'm also going to send it to myself, primarily so I can show you what that looks like. Then we've received your submission or your candidature, your CV, whatever. Right? So this is saying when this happens, take that information from step one, put it into the to email, put a subject, and then suggest, so hi, let's get that name from that person. Field values, name. We've received your submission. And then really you can kind of, let's just say for, let's give it a roll here. Status, what are those jobs that should be? So product manager. Note that you also have like metadata, right? So if the color is important to you, so this is a little more advanced, jobs, right? So you have the color as well. So if the color is actually something you want to communicate, that's available. Jonathan asked a great question. No, you can't use attachments in this step to kind of see what's been submitted or use attachment from previous steps. Okay, you should hear from us soon. Okay, there we go. Let's run a test. And that should send an email both to, oh, it failed. Oh, it's probably because Mila@gmail is not a real email address. So let's do this again. So let's call this, let's just give it to myself. Let's just say I'm the submitter, like that. Let's go and get that field again. So now we should have test again. All right. Always good when you catch that error on the stream, right? And so now if I go into my email, I'm actually going to give it a second here to receive that email. It should have sent it to myself. Let me refresh this, give it a second. Here we go. You got to trust, right? Trust but verify, as they say. So we've received your candidature. We've got, hi, Malame, we've received your submission for product manager. You should hear from us soon. So this was automated. So now when someone submits a form, you can receive that email, right? So if we were to kind of refill out the form as Aron G, I should have done this at this point, but that's fine. I would receive an email and then that's kind of that first step, right? So essentially notifying the submitter that we've received their candidature. Now, kind of thinking through our process here, if I go back to all candidates, every single candidate, when they enter this pipeline, this new pipeline, we do an action, right? So we do something, we create a task that is specific to this new status. So it's review package. So that's saying someone needs to review what we've received to be able to say whether we want to hire this person. And that again can be specific to whatever process you're doing. If you have tasks or things that need to happen in your base when something is updated or changes, you can specify additional steps. So Jonathan asked a great question. Can you change the email footer or remove Airtable branding? Today, the answer is no. It is sent from no reply plus automations at airtable.com. And all of that is kind of custom. You can control some of what's in the email around with Markdown. So the body does support Markdown, but you cannot change the branding. Okay, so next step here, actually, when we think of the first thing that happens when someone comes into our pipeline, it's not only that we want to notify them, but we also want to create that task, right? So we want to automatically create that first task that's related to someone coming into our pipeline. So instead of calling this notifying the submitter, let's say, new step. So that's essentially when you're in the new status, that's a new submission. Let's call this actually new workflow submission. New submission workflow. There we go. Okay. So we want to send that email, but then we want to create that task, right? So let me actually, for Mila, remove this task so we can see in action what happens. Let me get that first submission. So now if we go into this record and go into tasks, where is it? Okay, should be good. Now let's create an additional step here, which is creating a task. So create record. What we want to go do is go into the task table, right, and create for Mila a task that says review package. And this will be always the case when we're having folks come into our submission pipeline. So go into candidates. So actually, no, we want to go into tasks, and then we can choose the fields, right? So we have 3 fields here. Name, that's the name of the task, whether it's done, the candidate, and that's a lookup field. So that's a computed field, so it won't do anything. So let's choose a field. First, our name. This is going to be review package. That's always the case for new. Then in candidate, well, we want that name. We want to create a linked record from step 1. So coming from this step, hopefully you can see there in the bottom, field values, we want the name, and that's going to create a new linked record. Let's run a test. So a test run. So if I go to Mila here, right here, we have that task that says, review package for Mila. We go into candidates and Mila has a review package. Okay, so now we have kind of our new submission workflow. Let me turn this on and let's actually kind of test this out, make sure that it works properly. Cool. So it's on new submission workflow. What happens is when a record enters a view, that new view, we send an email, we create a record. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. So let's go to our form. Now I would let you submit this form, but I don't necessarily trust all of you not to say stupid things in the form. So let's say, Jeff K is in the new status, attaching their CV. Let's upload that. Applying for product manager, an email. Again, I'm just going to put myself just so we can see the email. Let's submit that. And coming here, going into runs, we see that it's just run successfully, right? So that means 2 things. I mean, 3 things broadly. First, Jeff K is status new. That's from the form submission. But if all went well here on the right, we have that review package task, right? So that was automatically created using automations, and you have that notification here. And if I come back here to my emails, you'll notice that we've received your candidature was sent to me. Hi, Jeff, we've received your submission for product manager. So with that, coming back to, I'm going to kind of like pause if there are any questions around that. We covered actually a lot of ground there. Does this make sense? Does it not make sense? Okay, seems like this was relatively, so we talked about what is automations, we went through notifications, we went through form response, and then we went through recurring tasks all in one. So note that, just quickly here, I'll actually speak about this. I won't necessarily do an automation yet. You can trigger internal and external notifications, right? So far, I've been kind of assuming that the submitter, their email is inputted, right? But at the interview stage, let's say I would assign myself as the interviewer. And let's say, just quickly here, we wanted to go back into automations and say, when someone is at the interview stage, we want to send an email to, this specific person, that interviewer. That metadata is available as well. So just quickly here, let's say I have new view, interview stage, filter, add filter, where status is interview, right? Choose trigger, enters a view. So enters this new, select a view, interview stage. Let's get that value. And I'll just do this step and you can kind of imagine what the rest is. As I come into the field values and I have the interviewer, you have their email, where you even have their name and their kind of all that metadata around that specific interviewers. So Leo asks, can you use this in a script action to fetch? I guess you could, right? There's nothing actually stopping you for using the script block. And I'll talk about that in a moment to actually send webhooks to different services. I thought that was a little out of scope, frankly, for this automations, primarily because if you send, I just don't see the value as much to send a webhook to a third-party service such as Zapier to then run an automation. In that case, just build it in Zapier, right? It just kind of makes sense to do that. Unless you want to give folks visibility in your base that you have an automation that then sends to Zapier, but you don't have that much visibility. You're just saying like send the webhook right through a script. So in that case, I would just do in that third party if you already have that set up. But theoretically, you could. And I feel like sometimes theoretically is enough for folks to go out and do it. So I do encourage you to check that out. So let's delete this automation. Let's come back to our workflow. And then there's a question around, can we batch run automations on existing data? And the answer is sorta. So let's talk a little bit about this. So this is the part where, this might work, it might not. I'm excited to try it out. So first, let's think about, let's actually do this a little opposite. Let's do the scripting action first, right? So far we have kind of been viewing the world as like, something enters a view that can be extremely specific, but we're only kind of working on that specific record, right? So we don't have access to all the other records, right? And that kind of becomes annoying, right? So imagine I wanted in the morning when I wake up to get an email that says, hey, you have these 8 tasks that need to be done, or you need to have kind of like these people need to be scheduled. And so we want a way to first kind of when something enters a view to go back on existing records. And then second, maybe we want to kind of schedule that in a way. Now, both of those quite require a little bit of elbow grease. If we can call working on a computer elbow grease, maybe finger grease, whatever you want to call it, right? So essentially, we need to do a little bit of work to do that. So let's imagine I want when someone enters the, let's say, interview stage. That's actually, I already had that view set up. So someone enters the interview stage. I want an email that's sent to myself that says, here are every single person that's in that stage. So let's go back and kind of think through this. So our trigger is relatively simple, right? It's, go and get this information from this view. Not the script, too early. Let's go to automations. Okay. So our goal here is that when someone enters the interview stage, we want to then send an email that says, here's everyone in the interview stage. Not only, hey, you just have a new person in your interview stage, but also here's everyone that's in there. Okay. So let's say interview workflow. So when a record enters a view, candidates table, interview, let's run a test. Great. It probably pulls up Maha. There we go. It does. And so now let's actually run a script instead of, because we want all of these records, right? So we're going to run a simple script that actually fetches all of the values, all of the records and some values from our interview, and then just sends an email. So with the scripting block, so I'm gonna actually go back. I'm never ever gonna code on a live stream. So let me just come here, copy paste this. I mean, I am copy pasting. That's almost like coding. I've heard that's 80% of coding, but so maybe I am coding live. I don't know. So when a record enters a view, we want to, run a script, and that script is going to, right? So just a few things I think I need to change. So get view should not be upcoming. It should be interview, right? And so essentially this gets the submitter, the status, and the jobs that they've applied for, and just runs this little for each record, right? Just outputs name, their email between parentheses is in status for this role. So let's actually test this and see what the output is. No pressure. It's a good time to get some water. Okay. So it seems to have outputted what it seems to be outputting something, right? I can't necessarily see what it is because it's a little long string here. But let's actually, so name, that all seems fine. Okay. So let's see what the output is. Can we see it a little more here? Okay, we can't. Okay. Can't see much here. Okay, so let's just run it. Let's actually just, then send an email. This could be a Slack message. Send an email to myself that says, hey, new candidate in the interview stage, plus everyone. So here's everyone in your interview stage. Let's take that. From run a script, let's put that in. Let's run a test. This should send me an email. Now there might be an error in it. Note that I'm going to share this whole base so you can actually look at the script after and look at all of the different automations. So if I go to automations, it seems like I've received, so I'm getting unnamed record. So that seems like something, but I do have the email is interview for product, is interview for product. So I am kind of pulling that information. So imagine you have a workflow that requires you to get information and it could do whatever you want it to do. So that script can actually run, a third-party API to update information and a bunch of other things. Really, I wanted to keep this simple in that notification stage. But there's really nothing stopping you from doing whatever it is that you need to do using the scripting, action. What's funny is do whatever you need to do. It's not very useful, I gotta say. But I think you understand the point. Cool. Okay, so now we've run that script. So every time someone enters the interview stage, let's turn this on. I would edit that record, but I do feel like we have one last thing I do want to get, not edit that script for it to work properly, but do want to kind of flow through this and show you this last thing, this cool thing of okay, so we've moved this into interview. This just ran, right? So it said it run a script, it outputted, and then it sent me that we have a new candidate in the pipeline. And I should give it a second here. I should receive an email that says, hey, new candidate in the pipeline. So that, there we go. And then we can fix that unnamed record in the base I'll send you. It'll have it fixed, or the one I'll have under the description will have that fixed. Okay. So last thing I do want to show you, this might be a little more theoretical. Let's say in the morning, you wanted to, let's say at 8 a.m., either see all tasks that are incomplete, or in our case, let's say just to reuse something we've already done, you wake up 8 a.m. or somewhere near that, and you want to see all interviews you have to schedule, right? So we're just going to reuse that script, but we want it to be on a schedule. Now, there is no kind of way today to say, okay, new automation, choose a trigger when 8 a.m., happens. But because you can tie a trigger to a view, and you could tie the inclusion of a record into a time frame to say like, hey, is it 8 a.m.? If so, enter a view. Then you could trigger your workflow based off of that record entering a view. A few trade-offs here. So let's create a new table that is just called, trigger. It's a bad table name, but it's okay. That essentially just says, okay, we only need one record. And let's call this a formula that just says now. What time is it now? Right? So this is now, right? And this is saying 10:33. So let's say we wanted to get, what time is it? So I might actually need to, let's go into formula field, and then, so maybe I just want the datetime format. Right. And so I want datetime format of now. And let's just go into datetime format Airtable. And let's just see what can I get the hour of the day in military time? Right. So they have something like that. Hour using 24-hour clock, HH. Okay. HH. Let's save that. So this is telling me 22. So now I can say, I can have a field that says, is it X time? So I'm gonna put 22 because I want this to run now. So is it 6 p.m. So it's going to check, it's going to be a formula field, and it just says equal if time equal 22. Note that this is GMT. That's 6 p.m. here, or UCT. I'm GMT. If time equal 22, run workflow. Else just give empty. Right, so now it's saying run workflow. So let's actually now create a view that is run workflow. And it just checks, is it 6 p.m. contains run workflow. Right, so this is saying, now imagine, I don't want to edit this, but imagine it wasn't, 22, let's say time, and then you want to run this at 11 p.m. You can just put this to 23, right? And it's going to exit the view. Let's undo that. It's going to enter the view. So this could be the fact that this only record we have in our trigger table enters the run workflow view. We can then trigger automations based off of that. So choose a trigger when a record enters a view. Let's go into trigger, run workflow, run test. It doesn't really matter because we're not going to use this information from this step, but at least it's found that record and we know that it's going to trigger, add action, and then we're going to run a script. Let me actually go back. So we're going to call this, all interviews on on time, I guess, at a certain time at 6 p.m. Now, if you want to get these in the mornings, you can update this script. You can update this workflow to whatever time you want. So let's go back into the script. Let's actually copy paste this whole thing. Save that, go back, and then run that script. So the output should be the same, right? So it should just give us those in progress jobs. And now let's add an email, very similar to that previous step. Send an email. All interviews currently, all candidates in interview. So we're actually just using the fact that we can be very, very precise in how we define a record entering a view to be able to trigger this workflow. So let's take that step. I could try to fix the unnamed. I'm really worried that it's going to be like a huge time suck here. Record.name, constant name, status submitter jobs. Oh, I think Could that be it? I'll fix it in the script after, and then once I add the base under the record in YouTube, there's like a recording. I'll fix this. It was working before, so obviously it was working before, and obviously it doesn't work live. So we can trigger here are all interviews, right? So if we test that, now note that we're not using from step one, so it doesn't really matter, what your view is. And what's great about this is because Airtable Automations runs every time a record enters a view, in an hour, this record is going to leave the view, and then tomorrow at 10 p.m. or 10 p.m. UTC time or 6 p.m. my time is going to enter that view again. It's going to trigger this workflow. It's going to send the email. So maybe you want to look at what are today's interviews. So very simply, you can just kind of run this script on today's interview. So just instead of running it on, I have it kind of as our interview table or interview view. I can just say, a view where is the interview today. And I could send it, I can even send that automation to, whoever I want to. So essentially we did just build a kind of cron job table, and that's exactly it. So it's a very simple kind of cron job. There's a lot of kind of things you can't do because but you'll have to code them through the scripting block. So personally, stupidly, I use this to notify me what day of the week it is in Slack, just for fun. So 9 a.m. Monday, I could use it for things that are a little more useful, and I should. But that was one thing I needed. Maybe I could tweet the day of the week every morning at 9 a.m. I could do that using the scripting block. All right. So back to our little... So we did scripting action. We did triggering recurring workflows on a schedule. That was what I wanted to show you today. Happy to spend a few minutes here, either answering questions or anything like that. And yeah, really, really appreciate everyone joining. Hopefully this was useful to you. We're about 40 minutes in. All right, so I'm going to assume no questions. Oh, that's great, Leo. Really happy to hear that this is useful. And yeah, this is only going to keep growing. A lot of options here, and really excited to bring more automation. It's kind of meta that there's now, Airtable automations, and I always automate all the things. Ethan asked, what are my thoughts around replacing other automation tools? I don't think the objective is really to replace other automation tools. It's really around enabling folks to do their work, right? So what that means is integrations with important tools, and just acknowledging the fact that, your workflow doesn't start and necessarily end or happen exclusively in Airtable. It happens in email, it happens in Slack, it happens in all different systems. And so, the goal is not necessarily to, have 400 integrations here, but it's really just enabling you to do your workflow. So can you use the scripting block to take a record such as record A, item count 10, and create 10 new records in another table. But frankly, you could use just automations to do that, right? Unless your automation is dependent on that 10. Right? If that's the case, you need to use the scripting block, yes. Because the number of items, so this, if I go back to automations and I go back to the number of actions, right? Your number of actions is defined ahead of time. So if that's variable based on that number in that record, you will not update. So that would be a good scripting scripting block. I don't know necessarily call it scripting block. It's using scripting and scripting output within, Airtable automation. So yes, that would be, I think, a good scripting. If you do build it, would love to see it. Yeah. Create a loop based on that input. I'd love to see it. Definitely, let me know. Definitely not the head honcho of scripting. I am but a copy paster of scripting block. And shout out to those who write scripts, because without you, a lot of my workflows wouldn't work. So I appreciate that. Awesome. Well, hopefully this got you a little ways ahead in that. Cool. Any other questions before I jump off here? I really appreciate it. You can always, tweet at me, Aron Kor, Kor, Aron Kor. And really appreciate everyone joining. So, thanks to Ethan who helped me out getting, this whole thing set up. Really excited. Hopefully we're going to bring this every week with different, sometimes features, sometimes Airtable, sometimes not. But really excited to be back on the live stream, actually stable live stream, which is fun. Cool. All right. Bye, everyone. Have a good one. Really appreciate everyone joining, and have a great week.